Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Defense Ecosystem Podcast, where we explore the global security landscape and examine Finnish companies who bring solutions to global security problems. My name is Valtteri Vuorisalo, and I'm the Professor of Practice for National Security and Security Policy at Tampere University. Today, we will be discussing various interdependencies in the global system and new technologies in defense. Joining me in the discussion are Dr. Mikael Vigel, the CEO and founder of the Economic Security Forum, and Chief Research Officer Mikko Hyppönen from SensorFusion. Mikko, it's great to have you with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Mikko, the technological sovereignty debate in Europe is ongoing. At the same time, we need to focus on new ways of delivering things and doing innovation. Do you see any conflict between these two?
It really depends on what kind of sovereignty we mean. Digital sovereignty, data sovereignty, sovereignty of our digital defense, sovereignty of our clouds, our storage system, AI sovereignty, chips sovereignty. It's a very, very large topic. It is actually a little bit sad when you think about especially cybersecurity, how EU used to be the leader in this field, how we had a multitude of research labs and especially companies in Europe, in EU, world-leading companies in cybersecurity in the 1990s, in the early 2000s. And we no longer don't have that. These companies merged with each other, and eventually most of them were bought and they ended up outside of EU. And that's what quite often happens. So EU is the powerhouse for research, for innovation, for engineering, but we're not the powerhouse in making them commercial and really building these innovations up.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate. What do you think is the biggest obstacle for that? Why is that happening?
Investments. I would claim it's the investments. If you have a technology startup and you are in Silicon Valley, there's no shortage of VCs, PEs, and angels who want to invest in your company. Certainly, we've built up some of that capability in Europe as well, but the scale is completely different. And then there's the next step. Once a company is no longer a startup, when it's a real player, when you need to invest into growth, when there's a technological breakthrough, European companies, none of the European companies dare to invest at the scale, especially American and to some extent Chinese companies do this. Just look at the hundreds of billions that Silicon Valley companies are investing into AI right now, like 2025 investments or planned investments somewhere in the range of 500 billion into AI infrastructure.
Wow.
European companies don't dare to dream about investments of that scale.
Yeah, that is quite the difference. I have a saying that we need to compare big numbers and small numbers, and unfortunately, we're on the small number side as a small country. How do you propose we navigate this new technological reality where China and US form two big polars?
Well, for a small country like Finland, 5 million people, how do we make a dent at world scale? We make it with innovation and great products. We have to accept we don't have the scale, but we do have the expertise. Like Finland has a very long history of great education system, great engineering. Some of the best coders on the planet come from this small country. So we can build the products. And if the products are world scale, world class, they have a chance of succeeding. And we really should aim at getting the engineering right. Whether we're able to then scale it and have the investments to make them really go global, sometimes we do. We do have the success stories, technological success stories coming out of Finland. Certainly in technology area, it's easy to name some of the hardware products. Like right now, for example, the ring manufacturer Oura is in the news worldwide, and that's a world-class company built on Finnish technology and engineering. So building great products, that's the key.
Yeah, no doubt. There's also a lot of talk about regulation and the role of regulation hindering innovation. How do you see that debate?
Well, it's absolutely true. Regulation does hinder innovation. We've seen it over and over again. But there are regulation success stories as well. And I would claim that GDPR is an example of a success story. I could name an unlimited amount of failures in regulation. For example, I hate the cookie law.
Everybody does, I guess.
It really changes nothing. I get the idea. I get why we wanted to do that, but it really didn't do what we really wanted to accomplish. But GDPR, I mean, before GDPR, when companies misplaced your data and leaked your credit card number, they didn't need to tell you. And if they don't need to tell you, why would they tell you? It's not good news.
No.
Well, now they have to tell you. And we can tell it's a successful regulation from the sheer fact that it's being cloned by many non-EU entities. Australian privacy regulations are largely based on this. South African, Californian regulations. Yeah. So, I think that's a success story. So regulation isn't all bad, but we should be smart about the way we regulate. We don't want to regulate ourselves out of the competition, which is what unfortunately sometimes happens with the EU regulation we've seen so far.
Yeah. Well, these are exciting times on many levels, and especially for you. You've made a sort of a career change recently, and you joined Sensofusion, and from a move from cybersecurity into drones. How do you see the role of drones now in the security landscape and in defense particularly?
Technology changes the way we fight our wars. Technology changes the way we settle our conflicts. This has always been true. Technology is what changed the art of war, from land war to sea war to air war to space war to cyberspace war, and technology is what's shaping the battlefield right now in the form of drones. And this revolution is faster than any of the previous revolutions we've seen. Now, obviously, we already saw first-generation drones in the Persian Gulf War 20 years ago, like the big Reapers and things like that. But that's a completely different scenario to what we're seeing right now in Ukraine. We see these Shahed or Geran 2 type of long-distance winged drones. And at the very same time, we see these quadcopters, which are being used for very short distance, like frontline battles. And when I say the change has been quick, when the land invasion restarted 3.5 years ago, initially the war looked pretty much like the Second World War. Guys in ditches with automatic weapons throwing grenades and artillery shooting artillery across the battlefield. But then it started changing, first with these quadcopters and then with the long-distance systems. And now, as we've seen from the news over and over again, drones are killing more soldiers in Ukraine than all the other weapons combined. And that's a pretty significant change.
Yeah.
So when I had a chance to do something about this, I took the chance. I spent all of my life working in cybersecurity. And there are a lot of similarities in cybersecurity and in drone defense. Big part of my work for fighting malware and exploits was about collecting samples so we could analyze the attacks, then build detection to detect these attacks, test the detection, and then deploy the detection to all of our customers worldwide in the form of updates. That's what we were doing in cybersecurity. Now let's take a look at drone defense. We get samples, in this case, RF radio frequency spectrum data dumps, which record what's happening in the air. We look at unknown drones, unknown drone controlled traffic in these samples that we get. We build detections, we test the detections, we build updates, which we ship back to our customers worldwide so they can detect new drones. So there are a lot of similar things in both fields. And to make it even more concrete, in both areas, big part of the problems were coming from Russia.
Surprise. But there must be some similarities also from an intelligence, and when I say intelligence, I mean like a smartness perspective. You have the famous Hyppönen law was stating that if it's smart, it's vulnerable, and there's a smartness to drones as well. Is there an attack vector in drones from a cybersecurity perspective as well?
Sure, certainly there is. The Hyppönen law, really, the birth of Hyppönen law was really simple. I just uttered it out loud during some of my talks because we were speaking about IoT devices, and it's a very pessimistic law. I just wanted to underline how we end up having more problems by adding functionality and connectivity into everyday devices. And we've seen that over the last 10 years very, very clearly. Now, drones are hackable. They run code. They have protocols. You can reach out to them. You can send exploits to them, all of that. However, most of our work in sensor fusion is to actually use our product. Our main product is AirFence, which actually will look at radio traffic, will be able to pinpoint the control channels between the pilot of a drone and the drone itself, and then somehow jam it or disrupt it. Now, we do quite a bit of research into protocol level vulnerabilities as well, but you don't actually need to hack a drone. It's enough if you're able to crash the code of the drone.
Yeah.
If drone reboots in mid-air, it is going to come down. The flight computer, when it stops functioning, you don't need to do anything else. You don't need to get code execution to be able to stop a drone from flying. If you're able to crash it with a buffer overrun or underrun or anything like that, that's enough. And there's surprisingly large amount of these things, which you will be able to find both from consumer drones, but also from military drones.
Yeah. Now, our listeners can't see, but you have the product here. That's a Finnish product, I understand. Made in Finland.
That's right. I'm holding in my hands AirFence 7, manufactured at our facilities in Vantaa, which is where I work today, right next to the airport. This thing has been designed and manufactured in Finland, and the customer base, well, it's NATO and NATO-friendly countries, mostly governmental customers, and 98% of the ones we've shipped and built have been sold outside of Finland. So it's a very global company.
Yeah. Yeah, very exciting times.
Mm-hmm.
One reason for that is obviously the events in Ukraine, like you mentioned. What would you articulate are the key lessons to be learned from Ukraine so far?
There's a lot of defense companies which like to talk about Ukraine and how they are building solutions for the war in Ukraine. There's much less companies which actually really operate in Ukraine and get the daily feedback and get the data about the kind of things that are actually happening on the front lines. We've been operating in Ukraine for over 3 years. We have over 100 of these AirFence systems in use, defending Ukraine against Russian drones. And that gives us great visibility into what's really happening there, both with the short-range drones, but also long-range drones. And we're collecting data. The company is called Sensor Fusion because we believe in having multitude of different sensors and then fusing the information coming out of these. The device we have here, it's working with radio spectrum, but we have a lot of technologies underway which will be able to detect drones with other means, including cameras, radars, infrared, sound, and other things. And not just flying drones, but also ground drones, marine drones, and submarine drones.
Yeah, the world is getting to be a very scary place.
If it's smart, it's vulnerable.
Yeah, and it's out to get you.
Yes.
So what would you say is the most cost-efficient way to react to this new type of challenge for a small country like Finland, who doesn't have the unlimited amount of resources that great powers do?
The traditional way of doing defense contracting was procurement. The government, in this case, the military, has a research project. We'd like to build a new kind of capability or maybe a new kind of a weapon. And then there's a long procedure of finding possible companies that could build it or maybe run a project and research and then maybe build a product, which takes years and years. The more modern way of doing defense contracting is that a company has an innovation, builds a product, funds the product by themselves, and then when the product is ready, then you can ask potential customers in Finland or outside of Finland if anybody's interested in actually having these capabilities. That's the way sensor fusion was built. And that's also the way modern defense contractors, like international contractors, think Palantir, think Anduril, That's the way they're working. These are not years-long procurement processes for a new product. They built a solution. Here's a fighter jet with no pilot, which Unreal just showcased. No one ordered that.
Yeah.
They have it. It flies. Would anybody like to buy it? I guess somebody would like to buy it.
They might. But that's a very important point that you just made. But it also requires capital. It requires investment, funding, which you mentioned earlier as well.
Sure, absolutely. And that's the way to get startups off the ground, and that's the way to get more companies in technology overall, and maybe in defense in particular. And it's also important to note here how the reputation of defense contractors, how it's changed over the last couple of years for pretty obvious reasons, because there's a war in Europe right now. 5 years ago, I probably could not have imagined joining a defense contractor. Defense contractors, they make killing devices, and, it's somehow dirty or unwanted. Investors wouldn't want to invest, especially ESG investors looking for ethical investments wouldn't want to invest into defense contractors. Well, now they do. Now the world changed. Where we are right now in Helsinki, cities in Ukraine are closer to us than some cities in Finland. This is not a faraway war.
That is an interesting fact.
Yeah, it's right. Utsjoki is further away than Chernobyl.
Oh my good! I had not thought about that.
There we go. It's you learned something during this podcast.
Oh, I'm learning so much. But speaking of learning, and let's go back to the if it's smart, it's vulnerable idea, and the battle space or the operational floor today is filled with various types of devices, not just drones and the old military equipment, but all sorts of devices, and the data flows are just multiplying, and the entities becoming super complex. How do you see that development from a attack vector perspective, from a vulnerability perspective?
The visibility into battlefield has completely changed.
Yeah.
If you think about previous conflicts, the amount of data you could collect was at a completely different level. And the information about individual soldiers or vehicles or anything like that has completely changed. Everybody's carrying a smartphone in their pockets. Even if they're in the battlefield, they have a phone. Quite often the phone is on. Quite often it's connected to a base station. Quite often it's online on the internet. Quite often it's leaking information through the various civilian applications people run on these phones. And the visibility into where people are, where in this battle space, where do we have more people and where we have less people, is actually visible through some of these data sources. And that really hasn't been the case with previous conflicts and previous wars. This is a digital war from the visibility point of view.
Yeah, and from an attack vector perspective, a lot of those attacks now are driven by AI capabilities, and the attacks are happening at computer speed. And I would imagine that this trend would just keep on increasing over the next 3 to 5 years.
It's definitely going to get busier in that field. I want to underline about AI in particular that I remain sort of optimistic about AI and cybersecurity, and I have to explain this because it's not obvious. Every technological revolution brings us benefits and problems. We've seen this over and over again. Like internet brought great opportunities and great new ways of doing crime globally because borders no longer mattered. AI probably brings bigger benefits and potentially bigger problems than any of the previous technological revolutions. But in particular in cybersecurity, when you look at the upside so far and the downside so far, I would claim the upsides are much bigger in cybersecurity. Yes, there are very large potential bad things AI could do, but that's potential. That's something that could happen or maybe will happen in the future, but hasn't happened yet. When you look at the upsides, many of the good things have happened already. All cybersecurity companies extensively use generative AI to be able to handle the large amount of attacks, to automate research into malware samples or to figure out exploits, find weaknesses from software so they could be fixed. For example, when you look at the top 100 hackers ranked by HackerOne, the pen testing or bug bounty platform, the number one right now is an AI,
Really?
not a human. But it's an AI which finds the vulnerabilities and reports them so they can be fixed. This is not a criminal. This is an AI finding vulnerabilities to make security better, not worse.
Yeah.
So the downsides, certainly the same technology could be used by bad people to do bad things, but we've seen surprisingly few examples of that so far. Even the things like deepfakes, which probably are one of the first things people think about when they think about AI and cybercrime. Certainly deepfakes are a problem, and certainly they've been used already to make cybercrime, but most of those things are pretty low level, like, a fake Elon Musk or fake Donald Trump pushing a cryptocurrency scam, a consumer scam, which is a problem, but it isn't really a huge problem at the large scale. We have surprisingly few examples of deepfakes being used against companies to do CFO or CEO scams or BEC scams, which obviously could be done.
Yeah.
But surprisingly few of them have happened. So what I'm saying is that right now, at this very moment, I'm seeing much more good usage in cybersecurity from generative AI than bad usage.
That is important to say out loud in modern times when we're so gloomy and focusing on the
We should
negative.
celebrate the victories we have.
Yeah.
This is a victory. At least so far, we're doing great.
Yeah.
And look at the bigger picture. I would claim cybersecurity overall is in a better shape than ever. And I know it doesn't feel like it,
Yeah.
but it is. I mean, think back 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
10 years ago, you would get infected with your Windows laptop simply by clicking on a link. You would do a Google search and click on one of the search results. Blam, you're infected with a drive-by download because you had the Flash plugin inside your browser or Java or something like that. Well, we've fixed that. That's not happening anymore.
Yeah.
You're not getting infected by just browsing the web because we made browser security much better and operating system security much better. And another great big win over the last decade is the fact that we do more and more of our computing with smart devices. I mean, phones and tablets, which are much, much more secure from cybersecurity point of view than traditional computers.
Yeah. What would you say is the biggest hidden cybersecurity threat nowadays that we haven't thought about?
Hidden cyber risk. I love that you used the word risk because that's the way I frame cyber problems, especially when I speak with companies and leadership teams and board members. I don't speak about cyber attacks. I speak about risk management.
Right.
Because they understand risk management. They already think about risks like, fire risk or floods, or if you're in an earthquake country, earthquakes or tornadoes, and they mitigate the risk. They do what they can to fight fire risk. We have fire deterrence and training and, things that help with that. And we insure against the risk. However, nobody's trying to burn down your factory every day, day after day, week after week.
No.
That's not a realistic risk. But, for example, the ransomware groups will try to get into your network over and over and over again until they succeed.
Yeah.
And then when they get in, they will shut down your factory just as well a fire or a flood would. So should you take this risk seriously? Yes, you should.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one risk that the modern discussion is highlighting every now and then is the risk of robots and AI and Skynet and all of that. Do you think that's going to be a default in future war scenarios or even today?
Yes and no. No, I don't believe in Terminator scenarios. But it's quite clear that the battlefield will be dominated by automatic weapons, robotic weapons, AI-driven weapons, even though we'd rather not build them. But the ones who'd rather not build machines which make the kill decision on their own are the players who are not in a war right now. When you are in an active war, you look at this ethical problem from a different lens.
Yes.
Both Ukraine and Russia are building AI-driven weapons, or, for example, drones, which once they are close enough to the target will do the rest of it by themselves. They know what they're looking for, and they will make the kill decision on their own. And this development will lead to more and more automatic weapons. And the best way to fight, for example, self-flying drones, which have a mission but will select their targets and choose who to kill on their own, the best way to fight those would be other drones, which will then look for the killer drones and will try to kill them first. And that's essentially a robot against a robot. So yeah, in that sense, yes, I do believe the battlefield will look like that. It's not going to be Terminator-like. It's going to be more like initially flying drones, eventually, I guess, ground and marine drones as well, which are trying to take each other out. That's highly likely to happen. It could happen fairly shortly, actually. Is that better than humans fighting humans? I guess so. But it's going to get complicated. But I know what I'm doing. I'm on the side of humans against the robots.
I want to be on that side as well.
Yes.
But if we were to promote further goodness in the world and enforce, if we had the power to enforce, let's say, 3 cybersecurity policies or practices that everybody would need to follow, what would those 3 be?
It really starts from visibility. Companies need to know what's in their network. Like, what does a normal day in our systems look like? How many users online do we have every day? How many laptops? How many phones? How many cloud instances? How much data is flowing in our networks? Once you know what normal looks like, then you can start looking for abnormal things. So that's really, I think, the key starting point. You have to have visibility. Then you have to have the human know-how. I hate the saying that user is the weakest link. I hate that. I really hate putting the responsibility on the poor user who's expected to be cybersecurity expert in all possible areas. That's impossible. We really should try to take away the responsibility from the end user wherever we can and put the responsibility to where it belongs. So training, of course, is necessary, but putting the responsibility just on the end user is unfair. So visibility, training, and then when you think you are in good enough shape, test your defenses. And the best way to test it is to get hacked. And you don't want to get hacked by criminals or foreign governments. You better get hacked by a professional who will tell you how he got in. So get a pen test. Pen testers will get in, I guarantee. They will find a way to get into your network, but then they will tell you how they got in and you can fix that. And then once you fix that, you can order a new pen test and, spoiler alert, they will get in again.
but hopefully a bit more difficult.
A bit more difficult.
Yeah.
It gets better.
Yeah.
That would be my 3 things.
On that positive note, what is the most positive thing in today's world? What is the most how should I frame this? What makes you optimistic about the future?
I guess it would be, I would go back to AI. I mentioned I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist about technology overall.
Okay.
I love the internet. I think it's the best thing ever. I'm really happy to be living during these defining decades when the mankind, for the first time, got online. And maybe we will be creating superhuman intelligence during my lifetime. And that's exciting as hell. Yes, it's also a little bit scary because that would mean that we would make ourselves the second most intelligent being on the planet, which sounds like a basic evolutionary mistake. But if we get this revolution right, we will end up with a superhuman intelligence which will solve all of our problems like poverty and hunger and disease. And I don't think there's anything more exciting I could imagine than that.
Yeah. I was going to ask you that, what do you think is the single most important breakthrough for the future? But I guess you already answered that question.
Yeah, I think it is. And it's really, really cool that it's happening right now because we've been waiting for it for forever.
Yeah.
I have this old Technique and Maailma magazine in my home from 1983. when I was 13 years old, which is the first time I read about artificial intelligence, keinoäly, as they phrased it in this old magazine. And they already got the building pieces correct. They describe a world where one day all of mankind's knowledge is no longer written on paper, but it's data.
Oh my goodness.
Which is what we've done. All mankind's knowledge is data today, not just new research and knowledge, but we've also digitized all the old knowledge as well. For example, that old magazine is available online as a PDF today, as everything is. So yes, mankind's knowledge in all languages is now bits. Then they imagined that we one day would have big enough hard drive where we could fit all of that knowledge on one machine. Now, of course, we didn't build one machine, we built the cloud. But essentially, that's what we did. We have all the knowledge as bits. It's all online at the same time. And then they imagined that one day we would have powerful enough computers. We could feed all of that knowledge into machines and they would remember it all. And with GPUs, that's what we did. It took 40 years, but here we are.
Which is a short time if you think about it.
You speak for yourself, Valtteri.
Mikko, you're obviously, I assume, on the internet. How can people find more information about you and the exciting stuff that you work on?
Well, you can tell that someone is old school on the internet if they own their firstname.com. So you can find more information about me at mikko.com.
Excellent. But unfortunately, Mikko, this is the time that we have allocated for this discussion, which has been absolutely great and insightful and sharp. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Mikael, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Nice to be here.
Mikael, you've been writing about the shift from market capitalism to strategic capitalism. What does that mean, and what are the security implications of that move?
So power politics these days is a lot about controlling critical flows. So flows of technology, flows of minerals, flows of data, energy. And this means that if the old world of globalization was about freeing up these flows, for everybody to tap into these flows and benefit from them, we're in an entirely different situation right now. Now it's about controlling these flows. We see friction in these economic flows.
Yeah.
Countries like United States, China, they compete on who will control these critical flows. So they put export controls on things. We see investment screening mechanisms. We see tariffs. Power is about to control these flows, and that changes our economic model completely. So that's the sort of the change that we see over to strategic capitalism, where states have very strong security interests when it comes to the control of vital critical flows. And this is what power politics is about today.
Yeah. Would it be correct to term it geoeconomics instead of geopolitics?
So this is what geoeconomics is about, really. It's power politics by economic instruments, by economic policies. So we talk a lot about the return of geopolitics, but traditional geopolitics is really what Russia does in Ukraine, right? It uses military power, it uses military means to conquer territory. But I think the bigger picture actually in today's international system is how China and US goes about its strategic competition by economic means. They want to outdo each other in the economic domain, on the geoeconomic playboard, so to speak. They don't really compete so much by using military means. It's really by economic means. And that affects us all. Our economic model is changing. We're not in the world of freely flowing economic flows anymore, in the world of liberalization. We see a lot of new, more or less protectionist instruments.
Yeah. Well, the United States and China as superpowers have a larger playbook than small countries like the Nordics and Finland. How can we manage in this environment due to our size?
So it's really about doing oneself indispensable. I mean, if we think about this, I will speak a lot about flows, right? And the managing of critical flows. So for the Nordics, we're very exposed to this. We're open economies. We rely on different data flows that we need. We're very digital societies these days. We rely on undersea cables to bring our data, right? We rely on energy from other places, oil and gas. At least in Finland, we don't have those. We have to import stuff. We have to import vital inputs for all our production and what we need. So this is really about diversifying our supply chains a lot. We have to be very careful but with not becoming too dependent on external actors for very critical things that we need up here in the Nordics, for instance. But on the other hand, we also see a lot of, we have opportunities in this as well. We, for instance, in the Nordics, there are critical minerals that go into battery production, go into the green transformation, the digital transformation. We can actually make ourselves indispensable in many ways as well, because we control vital production and vital things that are other needs. And we need to start to think more in terms of this, how to create certain niches that are indispensable for others. And that might give us a lot of not only wealth, but also flow control, if you like.
Yeah. It gives us currency to play the game. So
Exactly. It gives us leverage if we need, so that others would not either be also, others would also be careful not to apply sort of coercive means against us, but because we have something to give back with it, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the example of Russia utilizing gas flows is a great example, I think, and it highlights European dependency on Russia in this aspect, and we've been struggling to decrease this dependency. But from a Nordics perspective, what would you say is the most critical dependency that we have? Is it still petroleum and those types of assets, or something else?
So I think we rely on digital infrastructure that we don't control ourselves to in many ways, right?
Yeah.
So that is becoming one choke point, and we'll see certain signals already that some actors might be there might be cyber attacks against our digital infrastructure, and that it's a vulnerability for us. Of course, when I'm speaking about the Nordics having critical minerals, those are not yet very much extracted in the Nordics.
Right.
And those are really long projects. So we still rely on critical minerals from other places. And China controls a large degree of these things, and especially the processing of that, which goes into vital technological production. When it comes to pharmaceutical products, we rely on precursor chemicals and other things that also China controls to a large degree. So we have certain very vital dependencies that we need to start to think hard about how to diversify these supply chains.
Yeah. I guess what we want in the end is autonomy and strategic autonomy, but it's hard to balance strategic autonomy, resilience, and innovation at the same time. Do you think that's even possible? Can we get all three at the same time, do you think, or do we need to...
This is an interesting trilemma, innovation, resilience, autonomy. I think it's really a question of sequencing in many ways, right?
Sequencing, that's interesting.
So what I mean by sequencing is that you can't achieve autonomy right now. I mean, we're still so heavily in Europe. We've outsourced so much of our vital production to other places. For many years we lived in this fancy idealist view that we should specialize on things that we have a comparative advantage in, and then we sort of outsource other production, which means that a lot of very critical inputs we don't produce in Europe anymore. So now it's a matter of, okay, how do we re-industrialize in a way, right? How do we get to produce again these vital goods that we don't control anymore? Well, these require heavy investments, and these are long production times, right? So I think it's a sequence in a way that first, let's make ourselves as resilient as possible in the short term, so that we can withstand shocks that we'll see already, and we will see more of, right? When it comes to things that we need. Let's focus on that in the short term, more resilience, more redundancy. The second step is innovation. Resilience is about protecting value, but that will not take us that far. We have to create value in Europe as well. So we have to make huge new investments in to become more innovative, and have the capital to actually make those innovations stay in Europe as well. Now it's a problem that we are innovative in certain spaces, but it's very soon these innovations are bought away. There are even these killer acquisitions that external actors come and kill competition by buying out our innovations. So we have to innovate by making strategic investments. And with strategic investment, I mean, then you have to choose away certain things. We have to make investments in certain sectors of the economy which are important. Those are the emerging technologies, critical infrastructure, energy, logistics, the green transformation. We have to make much more investments in these. And then the third thing is then autonomy comes from that. Strategic autonomy comes from when you have become more resilient, when you're more innovative, then you can start to become more autonomous in a way. And that doesn't mean autarky, of course. It means de-risking in certain specific supply chains, certain specific production that you need to have of your own. You can't rely on external actors because that would make yourself very vulnerable.
Yeah. In Finland and the Nordics, we have digital infrastructure already in place. And we like to at least think that, it gives us an edge and we're world leading in some aspects even. How do you see that? Are we really? And if we are, how can we use that to gain advantage in this case?
I think one of our main advantages in the Nordics is that we are considered a trusted supplier of digital services, right? Or our digital infrastructure solutions are sort of built on trust. So if we think of Nokia and Ericsson in 5G or 6G, they're trusted, suppliers of this. That's a competitive edge for us, and we should use that, of course. And our whole infrastructure, when it comes to cybersecurity and things like this, I think we're in a pretty good position in the Nordics, and that's an advantage for us. We're also highly digitalized societies, of course, and that means that we can integrate new solutions, whether it's AI or something else. We can integrate these solutions pretty fast in the Nordics, perhaps faster than many other regions.
Yeah. That's something that I love to argue, that we should also, in addition to innovation, we should focus on implementation of new things as well.
Yeah.
All right. So you basically, what I'm hearing is that you see digital infrastructure that we have as a strategic enabler of sorts.
Absolutely. I mean, this is just a fact of life that digitalization is accelerating all the time. Where the data, the platform economy, and all this, the digital economy, that's where we're going, and you have to be competitive there. If you're not, you will fall behind, and it will permeate all sectors of the economy or security. I mean, if we talk about security is not anymore just about defending your territory as such. It's defending your digital infrastructure in many ways, right? It's about undersea data cables. It's about all the digital infrastructure that all our economic sectors are really standing on these days. So also, I think from a defense perspective, and even a defense, ministerial perspective, their mandate should actually be broadened up a bit.
That's very interesting. I was just going to ask that, if we see the securitization of everything, including economics and industrial policy and all of that, then does that really mean that, the defense ministry should actually be looking at these things or at least get involved?
Absolutely. I mean, economic security and national security are becoming enmeshed.
Yeah.
You can't speak about national security anymore without taking into consideration economic security. So the securing of the critical flows that your society and economy needs. So it's absolutely clear that a defense ministry needs a lot of expertise these days on, digital infrastructure, on energy networks, when it comes to logistics, not only military logistics, but civil logistics.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's not about, defense ministries taking on tasks of other ministries, but there needs to be also, of course, much more coordination with the private sector. So this is also something I think that goes with this more sort of this move towards strategic capitalism, is that you need stronger public-private coordination, collaboration, dialogue, because of course it's the private actors that own a lot of the 90% of critical infrastructure in the Nordics. So you can't really speak about national security without involving these owners of your critical infrastructure,
Yeah.
actually. So also here, the defense ministry will need to broaden up a bit their focus in many ways.
Right. That's a very important highlight that the private sector owns these capabilities. So collaboration is essential, which Finland, for example, is very good at traditionally. But what would you see is the biggest vulnerability point in this structure?
So I think the public and private sectors have a bit of different time perspectives, right? The private sector moves very fast.
Right.
The public sector moves usually a bit slower.
Usually.
So that's one thing. And of course, private sectors, they have very sort of granular perspective on supply chains. They have they know their supply chains very, very often. So they have this micro perspective into these critical flows, right? Where are the vulnerabilities? Where are the choke points in their particular supply chains? The public side might not be so aware of these specific choke points or these specific vulnerabilities and dependencies. And that's something that the public sector should have. The public sector didn't have a more macro perspective of the situation. So when you put those different sort of risk pictures or situational pictures together, then it's when you actually get a much more comprehensive view of our actual vulnerabilities, potential choke points, what's our strategic position within these critical flows. So that's something that actually would be important in that sense as well. Another thing is, of course, through a more sort of active public-private dialogue, you are able to vet new regulation. You are able to vet your policies before you do mistakes, right? So these days, I think it's often the case that the private sector are surprised by new regulation. They become surprised by new policies that they haven't been able to react to and adjust to, right? And that's not an optimal solution. It would be good if we would have more coordination already before policies and regulation is enacted. In that way, the public sector would also be more aware of the impact, how new regulation impacts the private sector. So this would be a win-win to sort of have a more active dialogue, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mikael, let's talk about the Economic Security Forum that you founded recently. Can you talk some more about that, and what gap do you think it fills in the current European security architecture?
So I think a problem in Europe has been exactly the sort of lack of public-private coordination.
Yeah.
So if we think of the security landscape these days, and especially the economic security landscape, you need better coordination between the public and private sectors. It's also a fact that our strategic industries in Europe, whether we talk about energy, logistics, defense, digital industries, they seldom talk very much to each other either. So they have their own associations that they sort of collaborate within, but there are less forms that they would actually coordinate within themselves. And these are industries that are extremely interdependent. They depend on each other very much. Bringing them together in a common forum and bringing them together with the public side can be extremely beneficial, and it's much needed, of course.
Yeah.
It's also needed when we think about making strategic investments, where to invest and how and in the most efficient way. So Europe has been lacking this kind of forum because Europe has been waking up to this new security situation very late. So we want to tap into this sort of need to create a active public-private forum, especially when it comes to very strategic industry that we now need to invest in.
Right. That's very interesting. Is there a similar platform in Europe somewhere, or is this very unique to the Nordics? And could we be a trailblazer for an example for other European countries as well in this?
There's no similar platform in Europe for the time being, and I think there's a reason why it's now created in the Nordics. Sort of it starts in the Nordics because Nordics has a tradition of public-private dialogue.
Yeah.
right? We're quite used to that. In many other countries in Europe, perhaps there's a certain suspiciousness about public-private collaboration. One is more sort of there's more this tendency to keep that for the public sector to keep the private sector at arm's length and the other way around. So I think the Nordics have often been pioneered in thinking in terms of comprehensive security, economic security, and why this sort of public-private collaboration is needed for this. And we have certain structures for that in place within the individual countries in the Nordic countries, but there's nothing actually on a Nordic level as such,
Right.
or in a European level.
You mentioned trust there earlier. I guess this could be seen as a platform based on trust, and which is super important in the current geopolitical climate.
So trust is absolutely key because this is a lot about information sharing, right? And in order to have information sharing, you need trust. You need a space where you can trust each other to the degree that you're actually willing to share information about your own vulnerabilities, about possible dependencies that might become vulnerabilities or are risky, and then sharing and coming to this sort of joint situational picture that we really need now, because this has been very much lacking. I mean, if we live now in an age of geoeconomics, or an age where our economic model is changing towards what we could call strategic capitalism, that's a lot about balancing our dependencies. That's what economic security a lot is about. You want to de-risk critical dependencies that might become vulnerabilities for you. So it's about really balancing economic dependencies. And to do that effectively, you need to know your supply chains, and you need to know how to diversify those supply chains, for instance, how to build in redundancy and where. And most effectively, you do that, of course, by collaboration and cooperation. You need to get those strategic industries together to do that. You need to involve both the private and the public sectors into this.
Right. So the Economic Security Forum then provides a situational picture of sorts of that. But then the question that follows is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but once you have the situational picture, you can actually provide some foresight based on that data. How would you elaborate on that?
Exactly. So we have quite a refined sort of risk and competitiveness framework that we use it with in this Nordic Economic Security Program that we've created, where we draw in the most strategic players on the Nord and the public side into a joint collaborative effort. So this is a framework for, first of all, scanning the mega trends, sort of the forces, whether it's the weaponization of the economy, sanctions and export controls, or the securitization of the economy, which involves sort of instruments like investment screening mechanisms. It can involve tariffs and that sort of things. How will these forces affect our strategic industries in the Nordics? We first need to get a picture of that. Where are our vulnerabilities when it comes to these big geoeconomic forces now in the world economy? Once we have that picture set about vulnerabilities, then we can start to think about, okay, how do we actually manage then our preparedness, and how do we position ourselves strategically when it comes to this? The Nordics have a lot of opportunities in this as well, because we have very strong players in the Nordics when it comes to energy industry, or we have very strong players when it comes to the digital infrastructure, when it comes to technology and so on and forth. So we sort of work together and learn from each other in this framework as well, how to best diversify, how to make risk mitigation plans, how to strategically position oneself in this new sort of international landscape. Where are the opportunities for Nordic industries here? So this is sort of the companies that we work with get a sort of a diagnostic of their preparedness in comparison with others, and their abilities and to position themselves strategically here. And what sort of investments need to be made on a Nordic level because much of the infrastructure which is needed to prop up our strategic industries, these require heavy investments, and they might not come just by relying on the free market, so to speak.
Yeah.
We need to actually to have the public side invest as well. We have to steer investment streams into these very strategic sectors.
Yeah. So basically, you want to promote the collaboration of private-public strategy creation. You mentioned earlier that these two poles, so to speak, have different senses of time, implementation of time. But is that the only misalignment that exists between these two, or is there something else as well?
I think sometimes a challenge with public-private collaboration is a bit of a lack of trust. The private sector might not trust the public sector, and they might not be willing to share all the information that they have. And on the public side, there are certain thresholds to how much information can be shared. There's secret information, so on and so forth, right? So what we want to do is to create a space where trust is really maintained, and over time, I think this will, of course, become even more trustful society. But we want to start from the start, have a safe space, so to speak, where these industrial players trust each other enough to actually share information, share their own risk situation pictures, so that we can get together a very joint, comprehensive risk picture, a picture of supply chains, where one can diversify. What are the opportunities? That's the challenge with this. But of course, in the Nordics have traditions in this. They have a culture of this, of course. So it's easier to build on that. Perhaps in the Nordics, I think it might be more challenging in other regions, perhaps, in comparison.
One of the tools of the Economic Security Forum is the Nordic Economic Security Program. How would you describe that and its role in creating trust and mutual strategies and such?
So this is something that's been lacking actually in the Nordics. If you think of Finland, we have this sort of security supply system in place in Finland, where industry collaborates with government in certain critical sectors, and we have a tradition for that. But this system is lacking on a Nordic level, and the problem here is that the Nordics have strong advantages in many of these strategic industries, whether it's energy or defense or raw materials, and the different countries have certain advantage of their own that the other countries, that Finland might be lacking, Denmark has something. But if we can get this to collaborate, actually, because we're heavily interdependent, so a shock to one country will reverberate in other countries as well. A shock to our electricity grid in Finland will reverberate in Sweden and Norway as well. So in order to become more resilient, and in order to be able to scale our industries, in order to be able to actually position ourselves strategically, we have to become bigger.
Yeah.
And becoming bigger means cooperating more actively on a Nordic level, actually. So with this program, we want to draw in the main players from all these countries to collaborate, and by that creating that scale that the Nordics need. I mean, if the Nordics would be one country economically, they would be the 11th biggest economy in the world.
Wow, did not know that.
They would be in the G20. I mean, they should be in the G20 as a Nordic forum. So there are a lot of opportunities that the Nordic have by collaborating more efficiently, and these new times really favor the big ones in many ways. If we think about that sort of friction into our economic flows that we are experiencing at the time being, and that we will experience more going forward, that is very, very sort of small countries, small economies are very vulnerable to that. So we need to sort of step up and become a bit bigger by scaling ourselves in the Nordics.
Yeah, and have more ability to control flows, which we mentioned at the start.
That's exactly it. I mean, together the Nordics can be quite an indispensable flow actor in many ways. Think of energy, for instance. I mean, there are, for Europe, the Nordics, for energy flows are quite important actually. Norway has a lot of sort of energy resources. Denmark controls a lot of energy, green energy technologies. In many of these sort of, when we think of critical flows, the Nordics together can be quite indispensable for Europe and for other parts of the world.
Yeah.
If we come together and think of ourselves as that sort of strategic flow actor, we can actually position ourselves pretty well, and that gives us leverage. That gives us sort of leverage also when it comes to negotiating then with other big players.
Yeah. If there's a flow actor, then we can measure perhaps flow agency. That could be a key performance indicator.
Yeah, I mean, I flow agency with AI, we can start to measure flows in any case much better. We get much more of a picture now about different critical flows in the world. I think that is one development that has been quite interesting, that we're working on as well with the Economic Security Forum. We built different trackers tracking critical flows, and of course we use a lot of strategic foresight and scenario exercises then as well to stress test sort of friction into these flows and how that will then impact the Nordics, for instance, and different industries. So, and that can be done much more efficiently these days by LLM-based techniques already.
Right. So if we look 10 to 15 years ahead, what in your view would be the single most impactful technological innovation or implementation or policy implementation that would have the biggest impact to security, geoeconomics, and defense?
Well, this is perhaps a boring answer, but of course AI changes, I think, everything, and it brings economic security and national security even more together. The sort of the controlling systems, and we've been discussing flows here, critical flows here a lot. With AI, you'd get a completely different picture and insight into these flows. Where are the choke points? How to control them? And I think AI will be doing this actually in the future very much. It won't be humans that sort of monitoring this as much.
What will humans do?
As much as exactly. well, us poor humans, where we'll be left actually. AI will be doing a lot of that monitoring, and it be on a completely different level, and we get so much more insight about this than before. But that, as said, it requires also defense ministries, finance ministries to coordinate more together as well, trade ministries, foreign affairs. That's the challenge. These ministries, economic policy making and security policy making, they've been working in silos for a long time, especially in Europe. Now they need to be brought together, also to be able to more efficiently integrate AI to policies and implementing them.
Mikael, this concludes our time together. It's been a super interesting conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. This was really, really nice.
And thank you to the listeners as well. This has been the Digital Defense Ecosystem Podcast, where we explore the global security landscape and examine Finnish companies who bring solutions to global security problems. Thank you for listening.